Well, howdy, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Muzyka Show, your favorite update in the battle for life, family, and freedom. Thanks so much once again for hanging out with me. My name is Muzyka. I serve as President CEO of Sidewalk Advocates for Life. We're the nation's largest peaceful sidewalk outreach organization, and I also happen to be an attorney and human rights advocate. Abortion, sex, gender, parenthood, family. What if I told you that these are the most important issues in life and that they are all tied together? That the transgender issue, the trans issue, for example, is really important to the pro-life cause and the other way around. After all, Planned Parenthood thinks so. In fact, America's largest abortion provider, Planned Parenthood, is America's abortion empire. If you didn't know, they are now the second largest provider of so-called transgender hormone therapy. But again, let me throw out there to you that we should not be surprised. And I believe by the end of this podcast, you'll see why and why you should even care. So with us today is one of the leading experts on all of this, our special guest, Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Dr. Morse is the founder of the Ruth Institute, an interfaith international coalition to defend the family and build a civilization of love. She earned her PhD at the University of Rochester and taught economics at Yale University and George Mason University for 15 years. Dr. Morse and her husband are parents of an adopted child, a birth child, and were foster parents for 8 children. Dr. Morse founded the Ruth Institute in August of 2008. She expected to focus on the importance of motherhood, drawing on the themes of her first book. However, Proposition 8, the ballot initiative to amend the California Constitution to defend marriage as the union of woman and man, hit the scene at the same moment. Because of her extensive research on how children need both parents and a stable union between them, she didn't feel like she could sit on the sidelines of the Prop 8 debate. She became a campaign spokeswoman and redirected her studies to address the whole range of marriage and family issues in a more comprehensive manner. The Ruth Institute began to systematically catalog the harms of the sexual revolution and to give voice to its victims. She has co-authored or authored 6 books and spoken around the globe. Her work has been translated into at least five other languages. Amazing. Today, the Ruth Institute equips its followers to defend traditional Christian sexual ethics by providing scientifically sound evidence, carefully reasoned arguments, and compelling personal testimonies. Let's welcome to the program Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse. Hi, Dr. Morse. How are you today?
Great, Lauren. Thanks so much for having me on your show, and congratulations on starting your podcast. I know it's going to do a great work for spreading your message of Sidewalk Advocates for Life.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I've been long wanting to have you on the podcast. I'm so honored that you're with us today. And like I said, before the show started, the first time I heard you was actually during an internship with Alliance Defending Freedom. That's the Blackstone Fellowship for us law students. Of course, the funny thing is I didn't end up practicing law. I got into grassroots pro-life work, and the Lord is using the law degree. But I have long been an admirer of your work and been following you. And I just find your story and your work so fascinating. So excited to have this discussion today. Let's jump right in. I would love to start here. How does an economist get into sexual ethics for a living? So if you can also kind of give us an overview of your work with the Ruth Institute. And I mean, you're covering everything: marriage, family, transgenderism, and you're an economist. So how does all that work?
Well, the way it works is that in economics, we don't just study the stock market, entire companies and stuff. You have the training that we have in economics is you learn how systems work together. So if the price of eggs changes over here, how will that affect the price of chicken feed and the price of bacon and the price of potatoes and the cost of labor and all sorts of things? You learn to trace something through a system. And so what happened in my life is, as you mentioned, we have an adopted child and a birth child, and those 2 children arrived in our home at about the same time. Our son was 3 years older than our daughter. And so he had already spent 2.5 years in a Romanian orphanage. And so we had like a controlled experiment in our house. We had a little girl who was born in the usual way. Her development was very simple, very easy, very routine. And our boy had had a very difficult start where he was deprived of a lot of what he needed. And so we spent those years very intensely focused on them and their needs. So I left academic life. I left university teaching and became a full-time mother. And that's what I wanted to talk to young people about when I started the Ruth Institute. You read my whole bio there. That's what I thought I was going to talk about. Ladies, you can start your family sometime before menopause and it will be okay. You don't have to be afraid, But then Prop 8 intervened and so on. But anyway, the point about having the two kids at the same time is that you can clearly see that kids really do need their parents. And when you see that children really do need their parents, you go, well, wait a second, this isn't something that just the two parents, the mom and the dad, can do completely on their own. They need certain kind of social structures around them to support them getting married in the first place so that they're both there for the child. There's a whole structure that protects that relationship, the relationship between the mother and the father, and the relationship between both of them with their children. And so as I became interested in that, the whole, what do we want to call it? So econ training, kind of all kicked in and go, oh, we've been changing all these things saying, oh, it's just a little thing over here. It's not going to matter. But then it turns out it has massive ramifications. And so one way or another, I ended up studying different aspects of the sexual revolution, including feminism and gay marriage and abortion and, and the laws surrounding contraception and so on, and divorce. Oh my gosh, divorce as massive changes, and you start tracing those things through and how they affect people. And you realize, well, every single one of those things was sold to the public as if it was simply a small thing that would increase our fun and freedom. That's how the whole sexual revolution has been presented to us. But in fact, we're playing around with the social structure that protects the next generation. The rules around who gets to reproduce, on what terms, what responsibilities we think they have, what rights we think they have with respect to the rest of society. We've been changing those things, just kind of one little nickel and dime here and there, and always being told, oh, it's not that big of a deal. But every single one of them was a big deal, because you're changing all kinds of incentives for people of what their next move is going to be, how they're going to behave, And so that's why we are where we are today, where when I was a little girl, I'm old compared to you. I'm really old. When I was a little girl, it was okay to say, I want to grow up to be a mommy. By the time I went to college, it was not okay to say that anymore. And now it's not okay to say only women can be mommies. How did we end up here? Well, there's a whole systematic thing that has been going on to undermine some of the most basic truths that society needs to survive on. And so that's how I ended up studying all these things. And of course, since it's so big, you have to have other people around you because you can't master all of these disciplines and all of these issues. So that's how I use my podcast, Lauren, that I interview people who know more than I do about some topic or another, and I know enough to know, oh, I should have that person.
Right. Case in point right here.
What's going on, but they do, and I know the issue is important. And so that's kind of how the Ruth Institute does what it does.
That's so good.
People. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. This is not in my notes, but it's a natural arc into the heart of our discussion today, which is the transgender issue, the transgender madness. How do you see the genius of the natural or traditional family working together? I still remember reading one of your books. I still remember this point in your book where you said that mother is naturally joined to child and that the husband is naturally compelled to defend his sexual territory, that biology and um, the genius of the family design, it all kind of one pours into the other, and it creates this cradle for new life, right, and for human flourishing. And then what about like the village that's around that couple and that family? Can you speak to kind of the human design and the human family as you see it, and the intelligent design behind that?
Well, it's not only an intelligent design, it's also a loving design. I mean, and this is one
Mm,
of the things that blew me away when I first, was taking care of a child who'd been badly neglected, because there are things that parents do automatically for their children. For example, the most basic thing is that you rock the baby. Mommy picks up the baby, you rock the baby. And if you're nursing, you nurse the baby and you hold the baby like this and you look at the child and everything. And it turns out, this is so astonishing, but there's part of the brain that actually develops from being in relationship with your mommy. And that's
mm,
why so many of the little ones in those orphanages, they found whole groups of kids. They actually created a new diagnosis. The doctors who went over, like in the 1990s, to the Eastern European orphanages, they called it institutional autism, because their thought was that these kids were not born autistic, but they did not have the human contact that they needed for their brains to develop the social part of the brain. It's the social part of the brain that develops when you're rocking the baby and you're making eye contact and you're teasing the, every little thing you do, you're looking at them and you're responding to them. Mommy's responding. And so the ability to be social comes about through the love between your mother and your father, between the mother and the baby. Well, where did the baby come from in the first place? The baby came from an act of love between the mother and the father. So the whole
mm,
thing, the whole design of the Almighty God is that the human procreation is an expression of love between the mother and the father. And of course, God's participation in every human life is love. Every single one of us exists because God loves us and wants us to
mm.
be here. That's always his participation. So no matter what mess up we've done, you and I know, and you know better than I do, that lots of kids are not born out of an act of love.
Yeah.
But God's participation always is love, right? And even when you have a non-loving beginning, if mom and dad stick together and they have the social support to stick together, they come to love one another. Very often that love grows. And I can tell you, you whether you start with a great marriage or you start with a so-so marriage, if you work at it, your love can grow, your love will grow. And that's how the community fits in. Look, we're here for you. We get that you're having a hard time. How can we help? And you guys
Mm,
do that all day long.
yeah.
That's what you do. And if you
Yeah.
don't do it in a spirit of love, of course, it's not going to work, right? But that's why it doesn't work, because the whole thing is meant to be held together with love. Well, in economics, we don't talk about love very much.
Mhm. Right.
That was kind of an off topic, considered off topic, but I'm convinced that actually the running of the economy depends on people loving each other, because you
Mhm.
need to grow up to be the kind of person who can be trusted, who keeps their promises. And children who have no one to love them, that's not how they grow up. That's not what happens,
Yeah.
you know. So that's how it. I would say, the big picture of how it fits together. And then if you wanted
Mhm.
to look at different social institutions and structures that we have that would be constructive, or that we don't have anymore, or that we could strengthen in different ways, well, we should talk about that. But the reason you guys need to be on the sidewalk is because there's so much non-love, there's so
Yeah.
much non-support, right? I
Yep.
think that's how it works.
Well, and we're having to be their village right now. And we're still figuring out how to be their village when somebody is not there for them, when boyfriend has cast them aside or mom has drugged them in there. They really don't want to do it. We're the ones empowering them to remember you don't have to do this, right? You can protect yourself and your child. And now a lot of the pregnancy help models out there are also bringing in the element of fatherhood. Like, they bring the mother into the counseling room, they do the ultrasound, holistic options counseling, but then the father's in the other room if he can indeed be included, right? And where it's healthy to continue to foster that relationship, then they do so, right? And so again, just going back to that natural design. Let me ask you this, Dr. Morse, again, a bridge into the heart of our discussion today. What is missing? This is taboo to talk about at moments in our culture, right? But what is missing with two daddies or two mommies? And why does it matter to children and to life and to all of us?
First of all, let's be very clear. Two men cannot have a baby. Two
Yeah.
women cannot have a baby. They have to get genetic material from somebody else. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've just described to you that in the normal course of events, a man and a woman love one another, and their act of love brings forth a baby. I want to say, and I think you want to say, that this is the child's birthright. This is
Yeah.
the child's birthright to be brought into being as the result of the loving embrace of their mother and father. This is what Christianity says. This is what the church says. This is what the church has always taught. This is why women flocked to the church in the Roman Empire, right? Because it was saying that the father doesn't get to just put the baby on the hillside and let him rot if they just choose to. But, a woman knew if she married a Christian man that he wouldn't do that to her,
Yeah.
So anyway, the reality is the mother and the father, the act of love produces a baby. There's no act of love between two men or two women that's going to produce a baby. I mean, it's just not. And so we are assuming that the artificial processes that we've developed are a perfect substitute for that loving embrace. Well, they're not. And we have all kind of reasons for knowing that they're not. First of all, there's a financial transaction involved most of the time. We call it donation, but it's not a donation. It's a sale, right?
Yeah.
And what we're saying is that what the law is saying, this could not happen without the law. You're a lawyer and you know how the law works. In this area, if you as a man, for example, masturbate into a jar, I'm going to just say it. You masturbate into a jar and you get $200 or whatever, and you agree that you will never have anything to do with that child. And the state says that you are a legal stranger to that child. The mother has no rights to you. The child has no rights to you. There's that relationship that should be the most personal face-to-face thing that ever happens, right, is now being decomposed into its parts. And we hope that it doesn't matter, but how could you possibly believe that it doesn't matter? When you really think about what you're breaking down when you do that, it's wishful thinking, frankly, to think that it doesn't matter. So let's just start with that. And I'll go on record. I'm happy to go on record. I am opposed to IVF, period.
Yeah.
Whether two men use it, two women use it, or a husband and wife use it, I'm opposed to it. It's not right. It's not the child's. It goes against the birthright of the child. And there are a lot, we could have a whole conversation about IVF, but that's part of this. Part of what gay marriage did was to normalize that and to make it like an entitlement, and that's how the law in various states is beginning to treat IVF. So that's one whole part of it. But now let's go back to the child development side of it. Okay, the relationship between a mother and a child is different in kind from the relationship between a father and a child. The father and the mother each play different roles in the child's life and at different times, at different stages in the life. In infancy, the mother is the most important person in the world, and daddy is really there to kind of protect them so that they can do the bonding that needs to be done, so that mom doesn't have to worry about a job. Hopefully she doesn't have to worry about putting food on the table or whatever, she doesn't have to worry about predators or, anything like that, that she has a safe nest for her to nurture her young ones. Well, as the kids get older, dad becomes more important. Dad introduces them to the outside world. Dad shows them how to manage in the outside world. If it's a son, dad shows him how to use his masculinity, how to use his power, how to control his power. Okay, you want to see something scary? You want to see somebody who is deeply troubled and deeply wounded? A lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times, the single mother, when her son is bigger than she is, things become very difficult because she can't manage them. I mean, like I said, not every time, not always, but often enough that you can see it in the data. Let's put it that way. If you look at your statistical studies, you'll see it. And with the
Yeah.
girl, the presence of the father shows her how she should expect to be treated by men. That's one very big thing that
So
she
good.
learns watching the interaction between her parents, how her father treats her, how her father treats her mother. You can't do that. One person at a time can't do that, and two people of the same sex can't do that, right? So
Yeah.
this is why the organic design is functional, and
Hmm.
the substitutes are not really functional. That's why.
Hmm. Well, and it just seems to me that because, the argument from the other side is, well, there's a complementarity between partners and all of that. And I always kind of pipe in and say, well, if you're telling me that woman isn't special, I take offense to that,
Yeah,
right?
right.
You tell me that man isn't special and unique, I take offense to that. We're
Yeah,
different and it's okay. And I
yeah,
actually have a lot of oh, I'm sure there's a better term for this at this moment, but masculine characteristics, so to speak. I'm a strong woman,
right.
my brother loves to joke that I'm an alpha female. I'm a leader of women, right? But at the end of the day, I'm so woman. I'm so
Right.
uniquely woman, right? If I
Yeah,
had grown up in a different family when I hit age 12, I don't know, I've had the wrong parents. They might have told me I needed a transition or something like that,
yeah,
right? A lot of these women hit puberty and of course then they start discovering even more so on a different level their femininity. But it just seems to me that even if there are different temperaments or personalities amongst men and women, that there's still a natural complementarity and
yes,
uniqueness to man and to woman that's intrinsic to man and to woman that also is intelligent for raising children. That when that comes together, man and woman come together, they do something so unique that it can't be duplicated by two moms or two dads, right? Is that a fair summary? Yeah.
yes, yes. And not only that, that parenthood, and one of the big problems of the whole sexual revolution, Lauren, is that people want to have sex without the full responsibility of child rearing. We
Mm,
resent the fact that sex makes babies. The reason you're in business is because of what I call the contraceptive ideology. I'm
yeah.
entitled to sex without a live baby. Sex is a sterile act. If you have
Mm,
quirky lifestyle preferences and you want to have a baby or two, maybe, but don't do anything crazy like have three, you know, uh, basically it's a sterile activity, and but in point of fact, of course, it isn't a sterile activity. These babies keep slipping through the contraceptive net, and getting conceived, right?
right. Natural.
But we're resentful. We're resentful of it. And then we're resentful of the fact that they need us, that these little people legitimately make demands on us, right?
Mm,
And they make demands on both of us. And therefore, we have to interact with that other person. And what if we picked up some jerk at a bar? And
mhm.
oh my gosh, now I have to be with that guy forever? Well, actually, you kind of do. Your child
Yeah.
is the embodiment of the two of you. And what you want is for that child to be the embodiment of your love for each other. And if you just do
Yeah.
something casual, then the whole thing falls apart.
Right.
So we're resentful of the connection between sex and babies and the demands that it makes on us. I think
Mm,
that's what's driving the whole ship, so to speak.
yeah.
And we're resentful that men and women can't be equal in every way. Well, we can't be equal in every way. And then, so the people
Mhm.
on the left, if you want to use those terms, they're all about equality. And in their minds, I know this for a fact, Lauren, and I'm sure you do too. In their
Yeah.
minds, the only way to make women equal to men is to neutralize the impact of babies,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So we
Suppress our
have babies.
fertility, make us quote unquote compete with men, right?
Correct. Correct. And
Man
and they're
2.0.
not wrong. See, here's the crazy thing. They're not wrong to think that, because that is the thing that drives the difference between the income differences. I mean, economists have known that since the 1960s, that
Yeah.
59-cent thing is a joke, that if you compare e- equal work and equal stuff, equal education and training and all of that, men and women are equal. But it's the babies that mess everything up. So so that group of people resents the babies because they interfere with equality. But on the right, and this is a very interesting thing to see, there's also a resentment of male and female, because having a baby is something you can't really do by yourself. And by golly, we
Yeah.
are radical individualists, and we are self-made men and self-made women, and we don't like the idea that we absolutely have to have somebody else. And this is pretty much irreducible, that we do have to have someone else. And what we've done, that mindset has done to us, is to say the human relationship between the mother and the father and the baby, that can be replaced with a series of contracts, that can be replaced with a series of transactions. So the single mother buys sperm from a sperm bank. Then she hires a babysitter to help her, or she goes to work and the employer gives her money that a husband might have provided for her if she was married, right? All of those things that the husband and wife would do together, that's all been, literally all of it, been outsourced and turned into, from something personal into something transactional. That's what we're
Yeah.
dealing with. And I think that's why it's not making us happy, to be
Wow.
honest with you. Right. I
Yeah,
mean,
we're
because
reaping the consequences, the natural consequences of doing that right now.
I think so.
Yeah.
That's what I think. There's a whole field called happiness studies, and it's a documented fact that people are less happy today than they were in 1960. That's a documented fact. And women are
Yeah.
more unhappy. Really.
Interesting. We tend to thrive in a healthy, natural marriage, right? What a
All,
concept.
all this progress, all this successful women.
Mm.
No, that hasn't worked out.
Oh, yeah, we're
Yeah.
missing out on the joy and the happiness and the intimacy, the glory of motherhood and being wives, right? Is not to say that you can't have your dreams and have a family too, but not at the expense of your family. You're not going to be happy doing that, of course, right? Dr. Morse, let me ask you this. This is something I see a lot at the abortion facility. We see as sidewalk advocates. We see so many times a woman walking in there with her companion, and uh, the boyfriend is very divided from the decision. Like, it's her call, it's her decision. She's already made up her mind, right? And of course, what we then aim to do is empower him to be a line of communication. Of course, we're in the disposition, according to the abortion facility, of trespassers. So I can't go in there without getting arrested. And I want to have a chance to talk to everybody. So I don't do that, right? But we send him and we empower him. We appeal to his natural instinct to be a protector and defender of the family. But what I'm seeing is that these men are so ready to abandon their wives or their girlfriends with this plight. They're not coming alongside of them to defend their so-called natural sexual territory, right? To be there for mother and child. So why do you think that is?
I think there are a number of things in play there. I mean, if you go into the sexual act with the idea that it's a recreational activity, and then you get a pregnancy, you feel cheated. And
Mm,
men and women alike have that mental thing going on. That response. That's a part of it, I think, for a lot of people. I'm sure you see that. People,
yeah.
how did this happen? Like, how did this happen?
How did this happen? Yeah, this wasn't supposed to happen, right? And
That's
even
right.
though it's a
That's
very
right. That's
natural and
right.
healthy
And
thing for it. Yeah.
you know what, Lauren, if I could say one thing, sometimes people say, everything's different now because we have reliable contraception. No, we do not have, quote, reliable contraception. We
Yeah,
have we have a myth that we have reliable contraception.
it's
And
true.
based
We
on
see it.
that myth,
Yep.
we do stuff that we wouldn't do if we understood that there's at least a 10% probability of pregnancy every single time. You
Yeah.
know,
Right.
right? And maybe more depending on your demographic group and your age and all that kind of stuff. So, but anyway, you asked me something else. I got off on a
Oh yeah,
tangent.
no, just the
What's
the
going on in
the
these guys'
the
minds?
experience of the boyfriend and the husband at the abortion facility, so
Yeah.
divided from the woman and the child and not coming in to defend her. So you had said your initial thought was that, okay, when we treat sex like a recreational activity, then it's putting us on a different path. And I think you were going
Yes.
along that line, right? So
Yeah. Yes. But socially, one of the social consequences of the whole feminist set of ideas, and I'm just going to put it out like that because I think people know what I'm talking about when I talk like that. Um, that is that woman's supposed to be independent, and And what is man supposed to be? Man's role as protector has been downgraded. The idea that he would be the
Mm.
protector and provider, that's an idea that feminism actively ridicules, right? That's patriarchy. We don't want that. Right. So
Yeah.
the boy growing up in this environment is confused about his role. He doesn't know what he's good for. Why am I even here? Kind of thing.
Ooh,
So he
yes.
hasn't. Do you see that on the sidewalk?
Absolutely. No, I think you're right. This feminist idea that men need to step off, and I'm tired of mansplaining, and I just kind of want him out, and we're kind of these two solid radical independents that come together to have some fun sex, and then oops, there's a consequence, right? Rather than him coming alongside her very naturally and being her hero and being a defender and a protector while she's walking through this surprise, obviously, right? But it's almost like I see the embodiment of the sexual revolution right in front of my face. This detached, hands off, I want to run the other direction, run from responsibility, run from care of this person that I literally have taken into myself, right? And created new life with. I mean, we see it play out every day at the abortion facility to one extent or another, Oh,
Oh, I'm sure you do. Yeah, I'm sure you
yeah.
do. I was thinking back to the when you heard me speaking. This was probably 10 years ago, maybe more than, had to be more than that, because this was Alliance Defending Freedom and their Blackstone Legal Fellowship. And I don't know what year
Mhm.
you were a first year law student, but it was for a program for first year law students, right?
Mhm. Oh,
Uh,
07. I remember it was class of '07 for
Is that
Blackstone.
so? Is that
Yeah,
so?
I
So
remember
that
it.
was before there even was a Ruth Institute, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
that's
I
before there
still
was.
remember meeting you. I came up to talk to you after your speech, actually. Yep. I still remember
Yeah,
that.
yeah, you shared that with me one time. You told
Mhm.
me about that. But at that point, I was still thinking that we were that our main target, our main problem was the feminist idea that was driving wedges between men and women, and that
Hmm.
was making men feel like they weren't necessary, they weren't important, and they were making women feel like that they were defective if they couldn't do everything themselves. Yeah, or that we were defective as women if we felt any dependence or any desire to be
Ooh.
taken care of, and yeah, and you're moaning because that's still an issue. And
Yeah.
at that time, that's what I was really focused on. Gay marriage was not on my horizon whatsoever, but at that particular point, I don't think,
Interesting.
I don't think.
Yeah. That's
Um,
fair.
but I remember because Prop 8 was 2008, which was also when I started the Ruth Institute. That's
Hmm.
another whole story. You read that in my bio,
Mhm.
but anyway, one of the things that I used to say, that in those kind of talks when I was dealing with it, I used to say to the young men, that your role is to protect and to provide for,
Mm.
and the strength and masculinity that you have, that you're being told. They didn't use the term toxic masculinity back then, but it was the same idea, that you're defective because you're male, and I can remember saying this to them, that this spirit that you guys have is something to be used for good, and is something constructive, and it's something that's socially valuable. And Lauren, I can remember watching the boys just sit up a little bit straighter.
Yep. I
I
believe
mean,
it.
it was like they were so unaccustomed to any adult, much less an adult woman, saying something like that to them, telling them that,
Yeah.
that there's somehow the essence of their maleness was of value to the community, and of course that's just gotten worse since those
Right.
years, but I
Right.
think that's what you were reacting to, that's what I was trying to convey, and like you said, you're seeing it in real time playing out on the sidewalks in front of the abortion clinics.
So you said that initially was your focus, and then you said then it was the destruction of marriage that became your
Yeah,
your focus next, right? Naturally,
that's right.
the
That's right.
institution that's destroying all of that and the natural design. I think my reaction is so much because this is actually something I've been thinking about as a married woman a little bit later down the road. Like here I am, a strong woman. Nobody's going to tell me what to do, right? Type thing, right? And I have actually figured out that when I play into the natural strengths of my husband and I play into my natural strengths and seeing the natural complementarity in that, there's a genius in that, right? And I can still be a strong woman, but I can also acknowledge there's certain things that my husband brings to the table that I can't. And there's
Right.
things that I bring to the table that I know he values. And that when we allow those things to happen, there's a beauty in that.
Yeah.
There's a deep breath in all of that. I think there's a reason why the old Disney movies, right? The man who slays the dragon and goes into the castle and rescues the woman. I'm not saying this woman is, of course, what was it? Snow White is just laying there on a table. She's not doing anything. She's asleep, or maybe that was Sleeping Beauty. I think I mixed up Snow White and Sleeping Beauty. It's the basic same storyline, right? But the idea too of this, there's something there about the man being the natural protector and defender of her in the human family. I remember Students for Life recently coming out with a study about how to reach people in the mushy middle. And one of the messages that they said, reach the men who were on the fence about the life issue and the abortion issue. It was playing to this idea of being a hero for that child, a hero for her, right? That doesn't appeal to me as much. I like people to say, hey, what you did was heroic or whatever it is. But as a woman, more so, I want to be cherished. And so there's certain things here that you're just hitting on that are so intrinsic to human nature that if we can just get our minds around them, it's a whole other podcast.
The reality is that no one is more helpless than a pregnant woman or a woman who's just given birth. Doggone it, you're not independent. You and your baby need protection. Full stop. And don't let anybody talk you out of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Think about it.
Absolutely.
You're vulnerable. Well, what's wrong with that? I mean, what's wrong with admitting that? Why wouldn't you be? Well, why isn't it okay to say that, So this is where you can really see the equality and the individualism, the left and the right, agreeing in this fundamental way that we're really, that the unit of society is individuals and not family, but the fact is a radical individual dies. Okay. Those little kids in Romania, that's a radical individual. They are not thriving. Okay. That's not how it works. A left alone child dies. So there's something fundamentally missing in our view of society if you break it down into literally individuals,
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And so both left and right do that, but in a little bit different way. And so that's why it's extremely important that the Christian community get its head together, and wrap your head around this fact that we can't really be aligned with either side, if you want to put it like that. We have to have our own thing that we have to say that they both need to hear in different ways. They both need to hear it.
It's a good point. Such a good point. It doesn't fit neatly into one political party or the other. It just is, it just is.
Right. Okay, you want to hear something funny? Okay, I know we're running out of time.
That sounds good. Yeah, hit me with something funny.
So one of the people that I stumbled across in the years of doing this is a political science guy called Scott Yenner, who did a book of political theory, and he went through and looked at all the modern political philosophers, starting with like Hobbes and John Stuart Mill and Marx and Simone de Beauvoir, and Hegel, all this whole list of modern philosophers. And he asked the question, what do they have to say about the family? And the answer is nothing. They don't know diddly squat about the family. Everything is individuals. You're like, what the heck? No wonder. No wonder. And this book that he wrote is called The Family and Politics. It's still a really important book. So all these, starting with Hobbes, and kind of going through chronologically until he gets to the end. And there's this Polish guy called Karol Wojtyla who sort of figured it out. You go, whoa. That's a shock. For those of you who don't know, Pope John Paul II was a philosopher before he was a bishop. And he had a whole philosophy of the family and a whole philosophy of love, and love and responsibility. And he really saw that there was something missing in the modern mindset and gave us this whole intellectual apparatus. If, it's going to take us a while to really get a grip on it and apply it and all that. But that's what it takes. That's what it takes, I think, kind of a big step back from what we've been doing for 500 years and go,
Yeah.
wait a second, we left something big out of the equation. Human society has to reproduce itself. And if we
Yeah.
don't get that right, we're going to have all kinds of problems. And it really is that simple.
I think it's going back to that original overstory, the genius of the design that we've
Ah,
been given. We're working so hard to neutralize everything between us as man and woman that they almost want to take woman and make her man 2.0, right?
yeah.
I'm running an organization that at this particular point in history happens to be all women. There's 19 of us women on the Sidewalk Advocates for Life national team, and we have, overlapping maternity leave, and we're very supportive to mothers, and we have babies show up on the Zoom calls and, things like this, right? And so, but that's natural for us. That's good for us. I had one of the women in our organization thank me the other day of supporting her as a mother and allowing her that as they need to at just this particular time in history, she needs to contribute a little bit to the family's financial well-being. But I think there's a way to do that that doesn't hurt her family and celebrates her womanhood, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so
It's
good.
cool too, because the pro-life movement is a women's movement. And
Mm,
particularly, yeah, pro-life in general is a women's movement. But if you get down to the pregnancy care centers,
hmm.
it's like 90% women,
Yeah, we're all
right?
attracted to this work for a reason.
Right,
Right.
right. And
Yeah.
so I've been making this point. I try to make this point whenever I can because the idea of a woman's movement has been corrupted into being nothing but this kind of radical materialist, individualist kind of feminism. And you're right. It's not really feminism. It's masculinism. How
Yeah.
can women be more masculine or do what men do and so on and so forth? Well, it's no wonder the kids are confused about whether they're boys or girls.
Oh,
It's no See, it's
yes.
no wonder that we've ended
Good
up in
point.
this place. So
Mm,
if you start off with a false premise, you'll just be spinning off contradictions left and right.
mm.
But that's what we're
That's
doing.
such a good point. Well, let's go ahead and get into the transgender issue. This idea that you can change your gender, or that secretly now we've discovered more than 90 genders. Like we're buying into this to the point where we're pumping our children's bodies full of cross-sex hormones, or I mean, and to me the whole thing is a walking contradiction because we say nothing defines man and woman, and yet there's specific hormones you take if you want to transition to from point A to point B, and then so-called gender confirmation surgery. But never mind the fact that originally your parts didn't define you, but now we're giving you different parts to so-called confirm your new gender. It just seems like madness to me. Like, how did we get here? I mean, maybe the logical answer to that is exactly what we just talked about, but can you unpack that for us a little bit? Like, how did we get here?
Okay, so yeah, we got here through a whole lot of resentment of the
Mm.
limitations of the
Ooh,
body. See,
yeah.
that's at the heart of it, I think, that I define the sexual revolution as having three big parts: the gender ideology, the divorce ideology, and the contraceptive ideology. And my book is right there on the shelf, The Sexual State. And I
Yeah.
actually developed that over the years of lecturing at Blackstone, as it turns out. But anyway, that's another side point.
Mm.
But every one of these things that we're doing, the sort of the big ideas of the sexual revolution, are based on resentment of the limitations of the body. So sex makes babies. We hate that. If we have babies and we're attached to that baby and the baby needs us and that baby needs us in particular and their other parent in particular, we hate that. We want to get rid of the other partner.
Mhm.
We're sick of the other partner. And so we have, and of course, feminist movement is just one form of resentment after another, applied to different kinds of things. So that's how we ended up here. That's one of the ways we ended up here. The other thing that we should say is that part of what's driving the transgender, I don't even want to call it a movement because it's not a movement. Transgenderism is not a grassroots uprising of people demanding cross-sex hormones or people demanding that girls' sports be taken over by boys. That is not how this is going down. It is happening from the top down. It's an ideology, invented by people with, we'll it's an ideology invented by people who have power in society, okay, however you want to define
Yeah.
that. And it's being imposed upon people from the top down. You can easily see that. That actually is the whole structure of the sexual revolution. It's always been from the top down, but some of the earlier parts were easier to sell because it seemed convenient. It's convenient to
Mm.
believe I can have all the sex I want and nothing bad's going to happen. And that's the basic message of the sexual revolution. I can do anything I want.
Yeah.
Nothing bad is going to happen. It'll be fine. And it's the job of the state to make sure that nothing bad happens. If something bad happens, we'll fix it for you. You know, somehow we're going to make it okay. But it's all about the human connection between parent and child. Uh, that we resent that.
Mm.
That's why we're willing to cash out our kid's other parent and get a new parent. You know, because we're tired of him. I'm tired of your father, so I get rid of your father. I get someone new. You know,
Yeah.
this is the ideology. So the whole of the sexual revolution has that feature to it, that there's a resentment of the limitations of the body, and it's being driven from the top down. This particular phase of the thing, the gender ideology, it's been shown that the people pushing it are wealthy people, a lot of actually rich white men who are pushing this, who have ties to pharmaceutical companies, a lot of them. Okay.
Okay.
So there's that whole aspect of it. But at the end of their road for a lot of these guys is transhumanism, right? That we're moving beyond the human body completely. You know, we can transcend the limitations of this body by mechanical means, by uploading our brains into a computer. You know, there's I don't know that much about it. It's kind of because I find it creepy, and I deal with enough creepy stuff. I don't want to go there.
Sure.
But
Right?
that
He's
is
wanting
what's.
to play God.
Oh gosh, yes. Oh
Oh,
gosh, yes.
that's it. That's it right there. They want to be their own God. I mean,
Yeah.
who can tell me that I need to live by these constraints as man or
Yeah.
woman? I get to design my destiny, and I get to say what goes with sex and when I have it and who I use and my level of pleasure, and then forget responsibility in that. Forget that it affects other people. Forget that
Yeah.
it creates maybe new life that suddenly I'm beholden to, right? Is that what you're seeing? Wow.
I mean, yeah, it's the same. It's the perennial human temptation of the garden. You shall be as gods. Did God really say that
Yeah.
in the snake?
Oof.
Did God really say that? Well,
Mm.
yeah, actually, he did.
Mm.
Wasn't
So
trying to hurt us. He wasn't. God wasn't trying to hurt us. He's trying to help.
he's actually trying to help us to be happy and to
Yeah.
flourish. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what's so interesting. We are talking about that last podcast too. So you see that obviously there's somebody on the back end helping to create this overstory. That's my new favorite word lately, by the way. That's whole their podcast, overstory, right? The other thing too is something that I wanted to ask you about this, something that I saw in Matt Walsh's documentary, What is a Woman? And I just encourage everybody to watch that if they get a chance. Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire, who came out with that documentary on the transgender issue, he was saying too that, you know, these kids that are growing up, some of them legitimately may be dealing with gender dysphoria, that this is a diagnosable thing. And I think they said upwards of 90%, you know, resolves sometime around puberty. This has to do with the identity question. Of course, these little boys and little girls go back to mommy and daddy. Hopefully they can identify then with mommy and daddy, right? And they say, oh, maybe I'm not a little boy, maybe I'm a girl, right? And they say, no, 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 you're a little boy, right? And so they kind of help with that. But then we have these adolescents, these teenagers especially, that are looking for community and a sense of belonging. And they are struggling because they don't feel like maybe they fit in. Maybe there's some social awkwardness. Maybe mom and dad didn't help them navigate something. And so here they are, you know, at school trying to figure out who they are and where they belong. And then there's an opportunity to kind of define who you want to be and how you want to belong through the LGBTQIA plus, I guess, movement, right? And they can now choose their gender and now they have a community. And
Yeah.
so I want to hear your thoughts on that too and the role that that's playing in all of this mess.
first thing I want to say is a little while ago, I guess about a year ago, I wrote an article that appeared in the National Catholic Register, and it was about transgender verbal engineering, I think it was called, or something like that. Anyway, in this article, I spelled out that there are like the term transgender can be used and is sometimes used in at least 9 different ways. I cataloged all these different meanings that it could have, right? So it can mean the case that you just now described, a teenager who's confused for whatever reason. A subset of them is the autistic kid who's confused because they're socially awkward and they feel all of a sudden they feel like they belong. They're special. When they say they come out, they're going to come out as trans, and everybody love bombs them, and now they fit in and they have a social group. So that's a subset of the confused teenager. Then you have another subset of the confused teenager, where the child may be gender nonconforming and may be likely to become gay or lesbian, and it's somewhere in their mind, in their immature mind, they think, oh, it'll be easier if I change sex than to be gay, so that's a subset of people. And then in addition to that, who are people who are genuinely struggling in some way with belonging, you've got people who are using the term in what I would call an opportunistic manner. So you have the predator, a man who says he's a woman, because transgenderism is a self-identification. There is no objective standard for being able to apply this label. The label, I mean, even the American Psychological Association defines it as what you perceive your feelings to be, that your feelings don't match your gender. So anybody can pin this label on themselves for any reason they want. Well, there are some guys who want access to women's spaces so they can be predatory, and they say, I'm trans, and they're being put into women's prisons. Okay. Can you imagine anything scarier than being locked in a cell with a convicted rapist who happens to say he's a woman? This is going on. So that guy has nothing in common with these kids that we just described, right? Then you have your mediocre male athlete who just wants to win. Okay. So he's a pretender. He's just pretending. He's not really confused. He's just pretending, but he's allowed to put that label on himself. So there you are, So the point is that word transgender can be used to mean so many different things. It's almost useless as a label, but it is very useful for generating confusion, right? And for throwing your opponents into a state of, into a tizzy, because somebody will say, well, I don't want a trans man in my daughter's bathroom. Are you saying every transgender person? It's like, well, no, you're not. You're actually talking about a subset. You're not really talking about the confused teenager at that point. You're talking about the predatory adult man, right? Right. And so that's why the conversation gets so confused. In my opinion, the people who are driving this ship, they know perfectly well what they're doing with the language. They know perfectly well that that confusion is willful and deliberate.
And whoever controls the language controls the culture.
It controls your thought. They're controlling how you think. So it's very important, I would say, for people to be clear in their mind before you open your mouth and even use this term. Who am I really talking to? This person is telling me they're trans. The first thing you say, if somebody says, I'm trans, you say, what do you mean by that? Tell me about that. What does that mean to you? Some open-ended question that gives them the opportunity to say what they're talking about. And then you take it from there, depending on what they say. But Richard Levine, who was in the Biden administration cabinet, okay, Richard Levine, who called himself Rachel, he has nothing to do with any of these people that I have mentioned. He is most likely what is called an autogynephile. Autogynephilia is a paraphilia, meaning a unique a fixation, a sexual fixation. These are men who become sexually aroused seeing themselves as women.
Interesting.
So it's a paraphilia. That used to be, everyone would say that's not normal, that's not healthy. But now we're not allowed to say that. Almost certainly Richard Levine is an autogynephile. And same with Bruce Jenner.
Interesting.
Almost certainly that's the case.
I remember you bringing
Very,
up a case before. Wow. Yeah.
very
Woo.
different from a little kid, from the kids you're seeing going into the Planned Parenthood. What, tell me, now you tell me, what are you seeing on the sidewalk, Lauren?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of times what we see is somebody, I mean, this is somebody obviously that looks just like you and me, a student usually, right? That's bought into this at some level. And it's a man that is gradually trying to take on characteristics, more feminine characteristics, right? A woman, vice versa, more masculine characteristics. And there is some sort of I want to be careful not to generalize because, we do see different things in different parts of the country. The culture definitely is a big influence, but um, there is this, well, I guess at that age too, this fascination with sex and being able to define what that is and the different partners that they like, right? And then of course Planned Parenthood's line about staying safe and taking good care of yourself while you're sexually active with many different people. So it's usually a sexually active college student that we're seeing who I guess is trying to find their way in the world, right? And so I've wondered what is, those categories that you articulated, where would I sort most of those clients? And it's a good question because we haven't asked maybe that direct question of, well, tell me more about that, right? We've just assumed that maybe they fit into this pot or this pot, but a lot of them are college students. So, yeah.
One thing we hear from the detransitioners is that if they've proceeded very far into the medical side of it, if they've done any surgery, okay, so go beyond the
Mhm.
hormones and go to the surgery that changes the genitalia or removes the breasts or something, they have a hard time finding sex partners. This is one of the things that
Yeah.
they're discouraged about, that they realize, boy, there aren't that many people who want to go out with me, and when they find out what's in my pants, mm,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's a very limited pool, and it's difficult for them, and
Yeah.
that's one of the things that they regret if they actually do the surgery. Um,
Mhm.
they're That's gone for life,
And
and
what
a
this
lot.
means for their fertility and future family. This is why I believe so much in the natural law is because it's natural for someone to be attracted usually to someone of the opposite sex. And if stuff starts changing down there, it's not as attractive.
Right,
And that's not
right.
discrimination, that's nature. Right? And then much less what that's going to do to your ability to be a mother or father later down the
Yeah.
road.
There,
So,
there are a few people who have detransitioned. There's one young lady that we interviewed named Daisy Strongen. She was on testosterone for a number of years. She had a double mastectomy,
mhm,
um, but she got off the testosterone. She detransitioned, and she's had 2 children now.
that's
So,
great.
so
Yeah.
that's really great. But it's different for a boy if they do the bottom surgery on the boy. They're not gonna be able to be a father,
Yeah.
and and
Yeah.
they it's at some point
Mhm,
they figure that out. So
yeah. Well, let me ask you this, Dr. Morse, just as we close out here. Maybe this is now a Captain Obvious question, but what is the remedy to all of this? I know I just love natural law, and I'm gonna hold back my thought on that. I'd love to hear your thought on how we can start to unravel some of this and get it going back the other direction, the natural direction, the crunchy direction, and proclaim the beauty of intelligent design and the purpose behind it. What would you
well,
say?
I think I think the first thing is that we have to be courageous because
Mm,
there's a lot of pressure to go along. And I
yeah,
think I don't need to explain that. Everybody knows what that looks like. We do have a good opportunity here that we no longer have the Biden administration, and I don't even want to say Biden because obviously Biden was not running the country. Whoever the Biden
right.
administration was, that group of people, it's now obvious that they put a lot of emphasis and power of the state into the trans issue. And you can tell that because when Donald Trump issued his first executive order, he had this whole list of things that had to go away. And they're still litigating on some of those things, and the people are resisting and, so on and so forth. I think the most important thing is to come to the deepest level of understanding that you can. And when you're having an encounter with somebody, try to bring it down to the most basic and most important question that the situation will allow. You don't want to stay at the superficial level.
Yeah.
I really think I can't give advice to people who are policymakers or, elected officials and stuff. I don't do that. Somebody else has to do that. I don't know how they do that or how they're going to do that. But for those of us who are doing kind of normal life, talking to normal people, I think you want to the subject may come up about boys and girls sports, but you want to, as soon as you can and as deeply as you can, bring it down to, but what does it mean to be a man in the first place? What does it mean to be a woman in the first place? And be unafraid to go to those questions.
Yeah.
And that means you need to know your Christian anthropology. You're not going to figure it out any other place. You really have to understand what does the church teach? What is the
Yeah.
ancient Christian teaching about what it means to be human, what it means to be man, what it means to be woman? We have to get a grip on that because the modern world has no clue.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and like I said, this is why I believe so much in natural law, because a lot of times when I'm out on the sidewalk and I'm talking to, say, a dad who, I mean, literally one is coming to mind right now that I met on the sidewalk in Louisville, Kentucky. His wife was inside getting ready to abort their fourth child. And he became this, once in a while you get a philosopher at the abortion facility as to why it's okay for them to do this, right? You get this pie in the sky dad or boyfriend philosopher. And, he was giving me this whole rigmarole about why it was okay to take the life of their fourth child and, maintain the lifestyle that they had. And I just asked him at one point, I said, "You love your three children, right? And I would guess that you have a chance to love this fourth child. Where does love come into this equation? Where is love in this story?" And he just looks at me and he goes, "I see where you're going with this." It's like, of course you do, because it's true. There's a law that's written on your heart that's telling you that love matters, your family matters, what your wife is about to do matters, and it matters how you show up and you defend and protect them right in this moment. And I was tapping into that, Every time I tapped on that, he would go, "I see where you're going with this," right? But I'm telling you, so many times out on the sidewalk, we as sidewalk advocates, this is why I just love what we do and the saints that I get to serve on the front lines every day. A lot of times we're untwisting these lies. We're untwisting these lies and we're bringing them back to what is good, right, and true. The natural design, the intelligent design, the fact that God cares for them and he has a plan for them and he wants them to flourish, actually wants them to be happy. And that the more that we run into that design, the more that we try to thwart the beauty of what God has designed, the more chaos that results. I see it every day at the abortion facility. And yes, it affects the economics too, right? This is why our economy at times is in disarray. We've got courts dealing with broken families constantly. Oh my gracious, right? Not to mention the missing population that would contribute to the GDP. Although I could care, of course, less. I don't care about that as much as I care about the fact that these children live. But you see it affect every sector of society. And you see it firsthand in a real primal level at the abortion facility. And so now we, as the people of God, get to show up and we get to be their village and we get to love and point them back to the natural direction. Because, when these women are met with love and support and resources and truth and kindness, a lot of them will just start bawling their eyes out and say, "I know you're right." I've never had anybody start bawling their eyes out and say, "I know I'm supposed to have the abortion deep in my soul." It's like, no, deep in their soul, they know this isn't right. And it's just the culture that's put all these layers of lies, one on top of the other, that we're having to kind of dig through and get through. And sometimes we don't get through. And sometimes they have the abortion, and it's not until they experience the natural repercussions of that choice that they come back to us and say, oh, I wish I had made a different decision. And sometimes it's not at the 2-week checkup. Sometimes it's 5 or 10 or 25 years later. And of course, this is what Christ gives us, is healing and redemption and the opportunity to begin anew, right? But in the meantime, I'm so privileged that we get to be the village that we're called to be out on the sidewalk when boyfriend doesn't show up or mom is dragging her in there. And so, this is why your work is so important, Dr. Morse, because I will tell you that when I think of the Blackstone Fellowship that I did with Alliance Defending Freedom and so many heroes that spoke and poured into us as law students, and then, many of us went off to do work in the culture battle. If it wasn't for that anthropology, that education, that Christian anthropology that I received, then I don't think that Sidewalk Advocates for Life would be what it is today. So much of that philosophy is interwoven through how we approach different conversations on the sidewalk. Women have received news of a prenatal diagnosis or dealing with, a risk of health or life of the mother and double effect and, these different things that we have to work out. So anyways, I'm so grateful. You really have blessed me as a person, as an advocate, as an attorney, and so many others. And I really hope people will take a moment to find and dig into your work. Can you let our audience know how they can find more of your books and articles, materials, and they can connect more with you?
Yeah. Sure. You should come over to ruthinstitute.org. That's our main website, ruthinstitute.org. We have tons of information there and materials. And we also have a very active YouTube channel. We have a podcast of our own. And you can come over there. And in fact, I interviewed you a couple of years ago for our podcast.
That's right.
So those are the two main places where you can find us. And the book that I wrote is called The Sexual State. How elite ideologies are destroying lives and why the church was right all along. That's the subtitle of the book. And I just want to say to you, Lauren, that the kind of work that I do and the kind of work we do at the Ruth Institute, we're like flying over the culture in a bomber at 30,000 feet or something. You guys, you gals, are engaged in hand-to-hand combat for one soul at a time. That's what you guys are doing. And we all have our part to play. I want you to know how much I appreciate and respect what you guys do.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, please pray for our sidewalk advocates. Even at this moment, there's no doubt somebody having an important conversation at an abortion referral center. And again, for all of you listening, please pray for the work of the Ruth Institute, the education that we need in order to be the best advocates possible, and then for our folks out on the front lines each and every day. We're so grateful for all of it. So thank you. Thank you for being with us today, Dr. Morse. So good.
Glad to do it.
Awesome. Okay. Well, a closing thought here. Whew, boy, that was what a rich, important discussion. Abortion, sex, parenthood, gender, as Dr. Morse demonstrated so well, it is all tied together. It's all tied together. I remember when Planned Parenthood became the second largest provider of so-called transgender hormone therapy. I remember our vice president at the time, Nate Robertson, who's now on our board, he said, of course they would get into this. They are the primary group attacking life. They're America's abortion empire. They're the ones that are primarily destroying the image of God. And intrinsic to that is the importance of mother and father and what makes us special as man and woman. We cannot erase these things without erasing the genius design of the family, the cradle for new life to come into the world, and thus for humankind to flourish. I just want to encourage you that if this episode impacted you, please share it far and wide. It does no good if it stays with us. Yes, we might have inspired you and maybe a few conversations, but again, there's nothing that quite replaces the expertise of Dr. Morse and those like her. So please get this episode out if this touched you in a powerful way. We need to continue doing everything that we can to witness to life, family, and the intelligent design behind it all. There's nothing more important. All right. Well, with that, thank you again for joining me for another episode of the Lauren Muzyka Show. We'll be back here next Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Central on Facebook Live, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Thanks so much, everybody.